ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Let's get to romance scams. Each year around 500,000 Australians are victims of scams. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission says that scams are on the increase with ever more sophisticated ways of getting people to part with their money. Just last week, a romance scam based in the Philippines allegedly lured Australian men on dating apps with a fake crypto offer. The scam targeted men over the age of 35 on dating apps and social media, resulting in the arrest of more than 250 people. The alleged scammers would work in shifts from a compound to align with Australian time zones, building trust with the men before asking them to invest their money in a fraudulent cryptocurrency trading scheme. You might think, I'd never get caught up in something like this, but it's not just the very vulnerable who get caught up in these scams. As the cliche goes, it can and does happen to anyone. Tonight we're going to find out how to spot a romance scam, investigate the syndicates behind these operations and hear the stories of people who've not only had their hearts broken, but bank balances as well. Joining me tonight, Paul Litherland is the cyber safety educator and former WA police officer in the Technology Crime Unit. Paul, good evening to you. Welcome to Nightlife.
Good evening, Phil, and evening to your listeners as well.
And Professor Cassandra, and we might get to Professor Cassandra Cross a little later. Paul, let's start with you. How common are they, romance scams, anyway?
They've been continuing to increase over the last 10 or 15 years, Philip. They're not as prevalent as we would probably commonly think they would be, but that they are bubbling under the surface, and sadly it's hard to exactly find out how many are out there because the reporting is quite low. So but it is sadly becoming more and more common.
Yeah. If you've ever been caught by one, interested to hear your own experiences too, by the way, 1300 800 222. I said I think it's a myth because investigators report this. That's a myth to say they only target the really vulnerable. How do they get to you anyway?
There's a myriad of avenues to target you. With the prevalence of the internet, we're reaching out in so many different areas and spaces now, Philip. So being able to get contacted as opposed to the old standard landline, like you and I might have used to had, but now you've got email, you've got social media. So that approach is so much more higher than it ever would have been in the past. So the ability to be targeted therefore increases as well.
How do they give us a typical case of how they get in contact with anyone?
Oh, wow. It changes so dramatically across different age groups, different genders, even different locations, but most are usually out of a cold approach. And that could be anything as simple as you could be on a dating site. That could be something as simple as you posting onto a social media account, something as simple as, okay, I'm selling some furniture on Facebook Marketplace. A scammer might go, okay, that person might be selling their furniture because they've just come out of a divorce or something. So they'll make contact and talk about similar subject matter and build that rapport. So often it just comes out of the blue. We're not really expecting it.
Really? So someone would get you on Facebook Marketplace. But what about the big elephant in social media, Facebook generally? Can they hack into that?
Yeah. We're sharing our life online a fair bit as well. So being able to sort of identify and track down information on a particular victim or a potential victim, it's easy to identify their peer networks, their vulnerabilities, and sort of intercept those. So it's gone are the days where the letter in the letterbox, which would be distributed to hundreds of thousands of people, and you get that low percentage of come back. And that's still the case, of course it is, but the ability to identify and search for so many more possible victims is a catalyst for why we're seeing
I presume with romance scams that dating sites are the prime place if you can run into trouble, is it?
Yes and no. We're also, I mean, we at Tech Crime in 2012, we identified a syndicate in the Philippines, which were actually jumping on. They had a whole pile of copies, Philip, of Australian bereavement notices out of newspapers. So what they would do is they'd identify that Mrs. Mary Smith has lost her husband, and then they'll make contact either on social networking or other means, email or whatever, because they could identify that and talk about that similar, I've lost my partner as well. So even though dating sites were originally the main target point, that's changed quite significantly over the last few years.
Wow. It sounds extraordinarily labour intensive.
Yeah.
I mean, how big are these operations that target people, or is it lots and lots and lots of small or lone operators?
It's a bit of both. You've got large syndicates working out of Nigeria, Ghana, Philippines, India. You've also got small-time operators that might only have a small team of 2 or 3. And yes, you do have individual operators out there as well who work over a significant period of time, but they're very complex. I mean, you mentioned in your intro how it used to be people who were very vulnerable or people who weren't too switched on, but now these scams are so much more advanced than they ever were, and the ability to interact with someone in a standard way is what we all do these days. But there's obviously a lot of people out there whose prime objective is to pull money out of us, and sadly, it's something we're not going to see the end of for a while.
Paul Litherland's with us. He's a former WA police officer in the technology crime unit. He's a cyber safety educator. We're talking about romance scams. You might have been caught up in one. 1300 800 222 is the number. Paul, do we have any idea of the size of it? I mean, how many people are being targeted on a weekly or annual basis in Australia?
Wow.
Do you think? I know it's impossible to know, but have you got any idea yourself, or even a gut feeling of the size?
We have anecdotally, we're having anywhere between 350 to 500,000 victims reporting a year, and that could be something as simple as losing $100, $200, 5,000, right up to. I mean, I'm dealing with a young lady, a mother at the moment from Perth, who's lost $1 million in a cryptocurrency / romance scam. So, honestly, Philip, it is the tip of the iceberg. And when we're having over $2 or $3 billion leaving our country in romance scams, I'd triple that, quadruple that to a degree, because again, it's such an underreported crime, and people feel embarrassed. We'd be all familiar with the case of Donna Nelson currently in Japan, and as much as it's such a terrible situation for her to be going through, and regardless of whether she imported drugs or not, I don't want to get into that, but out of everything else that comes out of this, the shame that she would be feeling, embarrassment, is critical to really, and we must understand that the victims need to be considered in that regard, because these scammers are getting very good. If you're
saying 350 upwards thousand people in Australia every year, maybe, and that's maybe a minimum, that's an awful lot of people at the other end doing the scamming, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're having millions and billions of dollars going to syndicates overseas, getting through international banks, pulling in and out of countries. And there's mule accounts as well, which are people who will also be victims of crime who have no idea that their banks are being used to launder money. So it is a very, very concerning, and you'll speak with Cassandra in a moment, and statistically it concerns anyone in this sort of realm, is that how much money would be leaving our shores would be phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Let's bring Cassandra in. Professor Cassandra Cross is from the School of Justice at the Queensland University of Technology. Cassandra, good evening to you. Welcome to Nightlife.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you with us as well. They are extraordinary numbers. Do we know where these people are located, the scammers, that is?
Well, we certainly know that a lot of them are based overseas. So there's organised crime in different areas. traditionally it's been associated with West Africa, but we know that there's kind of an increase in Chinese organised crime.
Go on.
Oh, just in terms of, I guess, if we're thinking about the victims, though, here in Australia, they can be located anywhere. And I think with the evolution of technology, you can be sitting kind of, on a property in the middle of rural Queensland, anywhere in WA, and you can be targeted just as easily from an offender overseas as you can be where I'm sitting here in Brisbane right now. So technology's really opened up the ability for offenders to target people.
So, Paul, you'd think it would be a whole lot easier if the scammers were here in Australia, wouldn't you? Why do we think most of it's overseas?
I think because, again, technology gives that ability as an offender. Mostly, you're looking at it from a criminal perspective. If you're going to commit a crime in your own state or country, the percentage of being identified and apprehended is much higher. More importantly, getting through the court process is going to be simpler because it's a local jurisdiction. But the internet doesn't have borders, Philip. So the internet has provided an international borderless approach, and knowing that even if there is a low percentage that you get detected, the chances of you being prosecuted and convicted is extremely low. So they take that approach and go overseas as opposed to working in their own backyard. And sadly, it's quite successful.
If you've been caught up in it, love to hear from you. 1300 800 222 is the number. Cassandra, what are the red flags to look out for when it comes to romance scams? I mean, how do you know whether someone's trying to scam you?
I think that's a challenge, really.
Hello, we've lost you. I think we've lost you on the phone there, have we? Have we got?
Hang on a second. Can you hear me now?
Just try again now. You go.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yeah, go on.
Okay. I think that's one of the challenges in this space, that when people are going online looking for relationships, they're not necessarily, I guess, looking for red flags, and they can be quite different for individuals. So for some people, the offenders will ask for money straight away and they will kind of craft a narrative that requires a payment of some sort quite quickly. And in some ways that can be a red flag. But there are other victims that I've spoken to who have invested kind of months and even years in some instances before an offender did ask for that initial payment, which certainly does, I guess, make it a bit more challenging. For me, the biggest red flag is any request for money kind of from anyone under any circumstance, because offenders will kind of target different approaches depending on the relationship, depending on the individual, and it can be really hard sometimes because the person is invested in the relationship, they trust this person, they believe this person, and they're not necessarily looking for reasons not to.
Donna in Canberra says, Phil, you only have to make a comment on a Facebook post and you get someone saying your comment's interesting and intelligent, and then you get a friend request. I never accept. You have to have some common sense. I think these scammers favour people in my age group, late 50s, and they like trolling groups where you find women where women like craft and quilting, says Donna. Does that ring true, Paul?
Oh, yes and no. And we got to also remember that that international communication, that external to peer group communication is something we all do. I mean, remember pen pals, Phil. So we all did that. I mean, Cassandra may well have been the same. It's that want to link with others, and social media has given that. So yes, as much as it's always I don't accept a follow request or I don't accept this request, a lot of people are, and not because they are suspicious initially, is because, again, these scammers are very good at what they do. They're building rapport, trust. Something as simple as a commonality statement on a friend request, I loved your stuff, I loved your pic, or I agree with you, can engage in conversation, and that's all you need, that little foot in the door. And as Cassandra mentioned, you could go 3 months, 4 months, 6 months before the question of money even changes hands.
Cassandra, are people sitting there making attempts to contact people hundreds of times a day? I mean, is that how it works? They just sit there and just are just typing out in the hope that a big scattergun approach will produce some results?
I mean, I think to some degree that's accurate. If we think just around the statistics, just around kind of liking different posts, trying to connect with people on different dating websites and other social media platforms, I think there is volume. But we also, I would we also know that some people are targeted. And so, yeah, I think it is a combination of both approaches.
We've been told that if someone greets you all the time with good morning and good night, or say they're looking for a serious relationship, or asks you to share pictures of food, these are all warning signs. What do you think about that, Cassandra?
I mean, I think what offenders are trying to do is to mirror that genuine relationship. So I certainly have talked to a number of victims who did experience that good morning and good night. So the offender was the first person that they spoke with in the morning, whether it was a text message or an email or a phone call.
Okay.
They were the last person that they spoke to at night before they went to bed. So the offender is trying to build that trust and rapport, and they are trying to insert themselves into the victim's life. They're trying to kind of take over in some way all of their thoughts and communications. We do also know in some circumstances with time zone differences between, I guess, in a relationship, that offenders, I think, deliberately use that jet lag, so to speak, to really get the person to be a bit tired, to perhaps not be thinking rationally, thinking straightforward, because they're conducting this relationship at really odd hours. So I think in some ways that can be a deliberate tactic as well.
So if you're getting messages at odd hours, you think, hang on, that's not right.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the circumstance. So some offenders will say that they are in a different country. They will say that they're travelling or for different reasons. They have to communicate with you at kind of odd hours that aren't consistent with our time zone. So I think that can be used deliberately against victims to make them tired, to kind of, just that feeling of fuzziness when you're not really thinking properly. And then when you get asked for things, you're not necessarily thinking straight, and that adds to the circumstance.
It's also been suggested that people who say they're a member of the military can often be a red flag. How so?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my research, offenders do like particular profiles. And if you think of military, I think it does work very well. So there's a number of offenders that will take on the identity of Army or Navy, whether it's here or over in America. And if you think about the people that are in our military, it's an attractive profile because there's strength, there's trust, there's loyalty, it is an attractive persona. But you also think about the circumstances that they can be deployed in different time zones, in different countries, that they're generally doing things that are secret, that can't necessarily be shared. They can go offline for a number of days because of a secret mission and explain some absences. I think it just works very well in terms of the offender being able to perhaps conceal some of the reality of the situation.
Because the thing is, Paul, if you're onto a dating site, I'm not trying to generalise too much here, but you do have a bit of vulnerability, don't you? Because you are saying, if you're on a dating site, I am a bit open to things. Yeah. I'm not putting people down here, but I'm just saying, because I know a lot of people use dating sites, but you are saying, look, I want a relationship. I'm looking for something. I am, my heart is open, as it were.
Yeah, 100%. And the modern teen or the modern 20 to 35-year-old might not necessarily, I know it's a dating app, but they might not necessarily be on a dating app to hook up or to date or start a relationship. They're looking to interact, and if that interaction leads to meeting cuppa at a nightclub or whatever, that's great. But a lot of our seniors, as an example, those who are being targeted, might push to a dating app to look for a romantic interest, to look for someone who might be sort of being able to assist them in dealing with a healing process or they've lost a partner or whatever. So they are, and they are vulnerable to a degree. But again, we look at, and social media does play a lot of role in this, in the fact that you can map out someone's life online to a degree. They pop up on a dating app, and then all of a sudden you can identify a lot more information than just what's being displayed on that app.
Yeah, Michelle's saying it's the same with Instagram, Phil. Make a comment on a musical artist and next day all these buff-looking blokes request to follow you. I also get photos of women requesting. I just delete. I hardly post anything, nothing personal. I just use it to follow profiles and organisations of interest. It's useful for information. Yeah, it's a pity that it's come to this, but it has. Paul, has there ever been? Oh, I'm just wondering about the legality of it anyway. If someone's targeting you from, I don't know, from Estonia, for example, or even from the Philippines closer to home, I mean, are they able to be prosecuted? Not really, are they?
Oh, yes and no.
It's not an offence it's an offence in their country, I know, but how are you going to get to them?
We have Australia has a relationship with a number of international policing organisations. Again, if there's a large number of money going through, which might be able to identify to the same syndicate or a particular group of offenders, then we tend to be able to trace money into certain areas. So there is a higher probability of an investigation at least being started, working in collaboration. Again, yes, as far as a WA victim being able to see as an example, a Filipino scammer being prosecuted in Perth, very unlikely, but at least them being prosecuted within their home country can offer some resolution, can offer some closure. But we
has it ever happened?
Yeah, it does happen a fair bit. I mean,
have we ever asked to prosecute someone in the Philippines and they did it?
Yeah. My team working at Tech Crime, we did that regularly. You've got a number of policing agencies at the moment in Australia who are working with Chinese police. There's a lot of money going into China, so working with these organisations. But again, it's so difficult as well because sadly, many of these policing agencies, they may be corrupted by some of these scammers as well, these syndicates. So being able to truly prosecute is very difficult. They're cleaning that up a lot now in some countries, but getting a prosecution from victim to guilty, it's very difficult.
Cassandra, because I can imagine there's a legal labyrinth here, isn't there, Cassandra?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of challenges, and I think, again, this is what offenders do. They leverage jurisdiction in their own favour. So policing across the globe is generally kind of based on physical, geographical locations. So whilst police don't necessarily have jurisdiction, there are many instances of them working collaboratively globally, but I guess it's just the volume which is really difficult.
This is a cracker. If you've got an experience with this, call me 1300 800 222. We can you can send us a text too, if you like. On maybe you've been you've been caught by these or whatever. Send us a text 0467 922 702. Rachel sent us a beauty saying, I once posted a comment on one of Guy Sebastian's Instagram posts and then had someone message me telling me they were Guy Sebastian on a private account. I immediately called them out and hit the block button. Yes, well. Neil says, hi, there are also romance blackmail scams. The conversation moves not to get you to send money, but to send intimate or nude or revealing photos. Is this common, Paul?
Yeah, I'm dealing, that'd be the highest rising crime I'm dealing with here in Australia at the moment.
Really?
Sextortion is, I've seen personally in the last 4 years a 2,300% increase in that over the last 4 years. The E-Safety Commission have identified, I think it's 28 or 33,000% increase. So it is huge, and now we've got AI that's been thrown into the mix. So being able to generate nude images is so much easier now. If someone, you don't even have to send them a nude, they can generate one. So and again, Cassandra will probably agree with me, but this is a side of scamming, romance scams. We are starting to see continuing to grow now is AI. You can generate so many different personas. The one offender can have 50 faces, 50 voices. It's amazing how fast this technology is going.
Cassandra, you've interviewed some 3,000 people who've been victims of romance scams. Tell me some of their stories.
Where do I begin? So I would have directly interviewed a couple of hundred, and I've read through cases of over 3,000. In some ways, every story is unique, but there are some similarities across all of them. And I think one of the things we need to consider in this space is that the nature of interpersonal relationships and the way that relationships kind of develop is different online to what it is face-to-face. And in some ways...
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so in some ways it kind of overcomes some of the misconceptions about why people believe what they're being told and why people do send money. So if I'm talking to you face-to-face on our first date, for example, I'm probably not going to open up and share all of my deep, dark secrets and all my kind of embarrassing things and everything that's happened to me. But if I'm sitting behind a keyboard, there is this, I guess, there's the anonymity of the keyboard, and I'm more likely to open up and share a greater depth with someone a lot more quickly than I would face-to-face. So it's called a hyper-personal relationship. So I think in some ways just the nature of our online communication really does open us up again to some increased vulnerabilities compared to if people were just dating face-to-face at the local cafe or at the local bar.
How soon typically do they start talking about money?
I think for money, it does differ. So some will ask straight away for money, and for some people that kind of is
that's an
immediate red flag.
Yeah.
But for others, I've spoken to victims who have really been groomed over a period of time, whether that's months or even years in some circumstances, and they genuinely felt that this person was connected to them. They had kind of discussed very intimate things. They may have sent some intimate pictures and recordings, kind of as we'd spoken about. And they feel very deeply connected to this person. So when there's a request for money, and it's not, the requests don't come kind of out of the blue and they're not for outrageous amounts at the beginning. The offender will kind of test the waters on something small, something little, and will have kind of, I guess, prepared the circumstances for that request. Or they won't necessarily ask for it, but they'll talk about these problems that they're having.
Which could be solved with $100 or $200.
Yeah, and so just, I guess, being a nice person in many circumstances, if somebody that you love or someone that you consider to be your partner is in trouble, then many victims will kind of offer that because they've been groomed in that circumstance.
I'm told that some scammers often talk about large amounts of money, not asking you for it, but just, it's in the conversation about how they're doing this or that, or got medical procedures, and you've got no idea how much I had to pay last year for my teeth. It was, it was $35,000, and oh, that's terrible, sort of thing. It's that kind of conversation which just gets the person being scammed into the zone of thinking about those kinds of sums. So when a request comes for, I've had a terrible problem with my teeth and I just don't, the only way to get them fixed is to spend another $10,000, which I don't have, that's the way it works. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so. So it's kind of setting up those conversations or even talking about larger amounts. And the victim might not be able to send the $10,000, but they might say, I can give you a contribution so I can send $5,000. But then something else happens and victims quite often find the amounts of money escalate. And over a period of time, some victims will end up sending hundreds of thousands, if not I've spoken to some victims who have sent over $1 million.
You're kidding? Really?
Yeah.
People with $1 million to fork out, you'd think might have more sense, but clearly it's not as simple as it sounds.
No, I think we really do underestimate the ability of the offenders and kind of the techniques that they use deliberately to groom a person and to be able to manipulate and exploit them from a distance to be able to do things that they ordinarily wouldn't do.
Paul, do you ever get the money back? Have you ever, you said you've successfully prosecuted people. Have you ever got money back?
It is extremely rare. You might get a chance where, as an example, someone might have transferred money into a Chinese bank account. You might have been able to get straight on the phone to the local police get on the federal police, and we can sort of maybe close down those bank accounts, and you might have a percentage come, or at least be halted, but getting the money back is extremely rare. And in 15 years of me being at the coalface of this environment, I've probably only ever heard it maybe twice. And it was, again, not nowhere near all of it. It would have been only a certain amount of money. That was probably the last transaction or two transactions, if that.
Someone says, just send them some teeth from the op shop. That's quite funny. It does remind me, though, I remember when I was a kid, I had because I'm thinking, I'm sure you'd agree with this, Paul, all crime is old. It just finds novel ways of being committed.
Yeah, and that is so true, mate, because it's cyclic, and it seems so weird to say that, but crimes that were occurring 20 years ago with the current generation now who are in their 50s and 60s, it was prevalent, but then it dropped off for a while. Then all of a sudden the next generation comes through, and so our new group of offenders then target that new group of victims. So it's sad, and I say it all the time. I honestly will never be out of a job, and it's such a shame to say that, but as technology continues to evolve, victim rates become higher, and the ease in which they can create these falsities, and Cassandra is so right in the fact that they do this very well. They're very good at what they do.
I'm speaking with Paul Litherland. Paul is a cyber safety educator, former WA police officer in the Technology Crime Unit, and also joining us this evening, Professor Cassandra Cross from Queensland University. We're talking about romance scams and how they get it done. Because I'm sure you probably think, as I did when I first started considering this, sure, I know this happens to people, but gee, it would never happen to me. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, it does. Cassandra, I suspect too, I mean, a bit like other frauds in a way, once you've been stung, you're embarrassed, aren't you? And that shame is something, I guess, that gets used as well, is it?
Very much so. So, I mean, we know with fraud that there is a high degree of negativity around victimisation, that there is this sense of shame and stigma associated with it, and that victims will often isolate themselves and they won't necessarily disclose what's happened to family and friends. And I think too, one of the challenges, particularly for older victims in this space, is kind of the additional layer around the awkwardness of talking about dating to your grown-up children, for example. And if you haven't told your children or your family that you are seeing somebody or communicating with someone, then when you've got suspicions or when things start to go bad, then it's even harder to talk to somebody that you trust to maybe kind of test it out and get somebody else's perspective on it.
Interesting. 1300 800 222 is the number. Line's free if you would like to relate an experience you've had. You can be as anonymous as you'd like on 1300 800 222, or maybe you want to ask a question as well. There are lines free. You also text me on 0467 922 702. Lots of people texting in, Cassandra, saying that spelling mistakes are a big red flag. Is that right, do you think?
I think it has had some accuracy maybe up until this point. So certainly I think technology and the evolution around ChatGPT and some of these, I guess, the evolution of artificial intelligence, I think it perhaps takes away some of those basic spelling and grammatical errors where you could really tell a number of years ago if the person was a native English speaker, for example. Yeah. So I think some of the warning signs that we've been telling people for a long time around spelling mistakes, around grammar, and even just around doing reverse image searches of pictures, because we know now that AI can create pictures and can create personas. So instead of me having to steal someone else's photo and identity, I can just create one, and therefore it makes a lot of our current prevention messaging somewhat redundant.
Yeah, okay. 1300 800 222 is the number. And as you say, the trouble with modern technology, including AI, is that it's, and indeed a lot of programs, it's eliminated spelling mistakes, hasn't it?
Very much so. And we also think, I guess, about the ability to target at scale, to kind of generate scenarios. And we do know that offenders previously have kind of worked together. So one offender might be having a problem trying to get money from a victim, so they will crowdsource, and other offenders will kind of share different approaches that they've used and have been successful. And now we're just seeing kind of technology take over that role in some ways.
Aaron from Tully's on the line. G'day, Aaron. G'day, Aaron.
G'day, mate.
Yeah, away you go. What do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just wondering, with the telephone scammers, how does Telstra aren't able to track their number and disconnect it, and the federal police aren't able to follow up on it as well?
Yeah. A lot of people are puzzled by this, Paul. I mean, is there an answer to this? I mean, a lot of people think, well, hang on, Telstra should be able to do something about this. I mean, the calls are routed through, well, not exclusively their system, but in large part.
Yeah, but again, we've got a lot of technology that can spoof numbers. So the ability to jump online and manipulate a telephone exchange in Sydney as an example, where most of our international calls come through. So being able to simply spoof a number looks like an Australian number, but it's not an Australian number, it's an international. So number one, the police will have to, or the telco will have to identify that vulnerability first of all. How did they spoof this number? How did it look like a Sydney number when it didn't? Which exchange did it go through? That's got to be investigated. Then the police got to get involved. Then we've got to try and trace which country the number came out of. Anyone in Australia can walk into a shop today and buy a little $2 SIM card or $5 SIM card, and you've got a number. So if we bought one of those at Garden City Shopping Centre and made a phone call into Uzbekistan as an example, I mean, it would be relatively a lot of resource and time for that policing agency to trace that number into Perth. So again, technology is awesome. It can be very positive and it can assist in investigations, but it also hinders. So trying to stop these numbers is almost impossible because they're coming in so many different
Aaron,
directions.
are you saying, Aaron, that you should be able to, look, if you say, look, this is the number that rang me and they asked for money, so can't that number be traced back to the person who made the call? I mean, in crime shows, Paul, this happens all the time.
Enhance. Yes, we see that, but unfortunately, this is the real world. So yeah, if your callers receive that phone number, okay, contacts local police. This is the number. Okay, the first thing the local police will do is do an RFI. So which telco did it come through? And the first thing, as an example, Optus will say is, sorry, that's one of our numbers, yes, and it's been spoofed, so it's been mirrored as such, and we don't know where it's come from because it's.
What do you mean it's been mirrored? A number's unique?
No, not necessarily. Well, it may appear that number is 04 whatever it is, and it may be unique to an Australian carrier. But remember, that's only just some numbers on a screen. Okay, how that phone number is appearing on your device is how you see it, but it may not necessarily... Hang on,
this is too hard for my brain. Is this too hard for you, Aaron?
Yeah, well, like... Hang
on. If I dial...
It's been a little while since I've got a phone number. I've had the same one for 20 years or whatever. Yeah. Isn't there like a 3-point check to get a phone number and to have... Well, to have a bill, you need to prove who you are, so...
Yeah. Yeah, but not necessarily in our country, yes, but mate, not in many of these countries where these scams are coming from. You've got people who are selling SIM cards in the back of a car park in a deli in a simple shopping not a shopping centre like we have, but just a simple little mart. Go back the next week and that mart is closed down. So we have laws.
Hear in the background, like there's a room full of
dare
I say it, Indians or whatever, and you can hear them all in the background spruiking the same bullshit gimmick.
No, I'm with you, Aaron. Look, thanks for asking the question. I'm still a bit puzzled here, Paul. I mean, Cassandra, please jump in if you can add something here too. I mean, if I dial a number 1234556, that's an actual number, and so surely that can be reverse traced. I don't get this mirroring thing.
If you go look at a VPN, a virtual private network, okay, so an internet connection that can mask your internet connection. So if you're going through your internet and you've got a VPN, imagine a piece of string tied to your shorts, Philip. So if you've made a call from that phone to your mate. Yes, you've gone from that piece of string on your shorts to your mate's phone. So easy to trace, easy to identify. But a VPN or an encryption system, if you can now imagine that you've tied a piece of string and I would say to you, okay, I want you to go walk around your suburb for the next hour and go through in and out as many doors as you can. Now, yes, you still have that string attached to your belt, and I will eventually be able to trace exactly where your phone has been, but that takes time. Okay, eventually I'll be able to identify that the call has come from a certain source, but how, and again, we're talking hundreds of thousands of calls coming to Australia probably a month. How we've got the time and resources to do that it's almost impossible, and I'm quite certain Cassandra will agree with that.
Very much so. So I think the technology, and I certainly don't profess to understand it as well, but the technology is there, which does make it difficult. And the only thing I would say in addition to this is that the telecommunication providers have been doing work in this space. And if you look at the ScamWatch report for last year, which looks at all the stats around fraud reports in 2023, it was the first time that phone calls, in terms of the type of approach, is not the number one category. So phone calls in terms of the ways that offenders are targeting victims has dropped, and email has taken the number one spot. And that's the first time in over a decade that that's happened.
Are there cases, says my texter, where someone who may have previously known the person, like an old school friend, becomes a love scammer? That is, are scammers always strangers? Cassandra or Paul?
I think that's a good question. I would say the majority of the victims that I've spoken to they've been strangers, and they've had no previous contact. But I can think of just a handful of examples where the victim potentially did know the offender. And we also, I think, need to realise that for some of these, we've been talking a lot about romance fraud in terms of, I guess, the overseas offender targeting the victim based here in Australia. But there are also, I guess, a number of incidents and a number of circumstances where the victim and the offender are here, but the offender is portraying somebody else's life, and they might have physical interactions, but they're still targeting someone's money, and the impact is still real.
Hannah says on the text line, Phil, I received an email today supposedly from Apple asking me to confirm my email address and provide a recovery and legacy contact so somebody else could access my account. There were links in the email. The spelling was perfect. Grammar looked pretty good. But the email came from an Apple account at insideapple.com. I reported it for phishing. It didn't feel right. See, the thing is here, Cassandra and Paul, because we, with the limited time we've got left, how do you protect yourself here? I mean, you should never respond to anything, should you?
It's funny.
And that makes the whole internet completely unusable, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. I did get that exact same email today, and I had those same thoughts around, I'm not necessarily sure what to do. I'll think about this later.
Yeah.
I think the internet does provide challenges for us in terms of being able to distinguish what's true and what's not. But I don't necessarily think that we should kind of be abandoning it, or we should be not getting out there and trying to communicate with people. I think we need to just really recognise that there are threats out there, that sadly there are people that want our personal information and want our money. And just my advice is around open communication with friends and family, not being afraid to ask questions. If it doesn't feel right, kind of going with that, and never feeling pressured into any of these types of situations.
What about a blanket rule? Never ever send money to a person you do not know.
Yeah, I think the challenge with that in the case of romance fraud is that victims will say that it's not a stranger. So if you've been talking to somebody, even if you haven't met them physically, if you've been communicating with them multiple times a day for months or even years, then that's not a stranger. That's not somebody that you feel you've just met off the street.
Yeah.
So I think for me, I would extend it to say, don't send money to anybody that you're not willing to lose.
What about this one, Paul? I won't send you anything unless I can speak to you.
Yeah, and that's a positive as well. But again, we're looking at...
Are there instances where they do speak to you?
Yeah, of course there are. And again, this is where that uniqueness in regards to building that trust is so prevalent. Okay, we've been talking on WhatsApp. We've been engaging in conversation. A lot of that conversation can be intimate conversation. So you've that closeness again. That request for money doesn't seem as so suspicious as you would think in the timeline of a romance scam is it's quick, it happens straight away. It's not necessarily the case. And just reflecting on a few of the things Cassandra said, it's so true. Many of the victims I've dealt with, they had suspicions, but they didn't act on those suspicions. They didn't think, after the fact they responded or reacted, not during. And I mean, I had victims when we were working at Tech Crime, Philip, who were in our office, and they were arguing with us. They were in tears. They were sobbing, going, "No, I love him. I know this is who he is." We had to tell them, "I'm so sorry, mate. This is a scammer. This is." So you had to get right into the intricacies of it, and the heartbreak they felt, and you felt as well, is so. It's a side of romance scams that a lot of the public don't see, and this is why I have so much empathy for victims. As yes, some people might go, "Well, they're idiots. They shouldn't have done this." It's not as simple as that, and it's important we don't. No,
because in fact, as you and I have already discussed, and Cassandra, I'm sure you'd agree with this too. Romance scams are not new. They're just now being conducted over the internet. Once upon a time, there were unscrupulous men preying on women who were, I don't want to use the word gullible, but open to things, and got ripped off. It's just that this enables people to rip off more people in a shorter period of time. It's a cruel way to lose money. Can banks do anything about the situation, Cassandra?
So a lot of victims will go to the bank in the first instance to try and recover funds. But similar to many of the challenges that we talked about before, if a victim has transferred money, unless they get to it very quickly, it's likely taken out of the account that they might have transferred it to here in Australia, or if they transferred it overseas, offenders are very quick to clear the money that's being sent through. And there are very few circumstances that I'm aware of where victims are able to recover funds. And that's certainly a challenge in this space.
What do you think, Paul? I mean, do you think banks should be more open to doing something about it?
The banks are responding very well, considering again the intricacies and the vulnerabilities at time of their clients, people sending money. It's difficult to identify every specific incident that might be suspicious, but our banks are working a lot better. They've got rules in place now. They've got legislation that they have to cover. If a senior, as an example, walks into a branch and says, "Look, I need $10,000," they'll ask specific questions, which is good. But on the flip side of that, you also get some negativity as well. Why are you asking? It's none of your business. But I think it's important that we get these little stop gaps in place to at least start conversations. Is where is this money going? To my friend over in South Africa. Oh, okay, well, who is it? Blah, blah, blah. So the banks are responding, but again, we also have a lot of international transactions. Many of my offenders are now pushing some victims to cryptocurrency trading. So there's a way of laundering money there as well. So it's much more complex.
Trouble with cryptocurrency schemes is that no one understands them, do they? In all honesty, and it sounds like an easy way to get rich because you're constantly being told of who does get rich. So it's probably quite enticing, is it?
Yeah, and that's it. It's again, remember, if you've got someone who you've been talking with for 5 or 6 months who you now trust, I got some money the other day. I've got a friend who invests in this, and they'll explain it. They'll talk about how it works. They push the conversation that way. So all of a sudden, a person who may not have any idea about crypto, maybe 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, they're actually into it. So again, those vulnerabilities and pushing conversations to a certain degree is where they're very good at. And just quickly, mate, we did a raid over in the Philippines in 2013, and there was a guy at the front of the syndicate we thought was involved. He was giving an elocution lesson to the syndicate, teaching them how to speak English and Australian. He was actually a university professor. He thought he was talking to a phone company, but it turned out to be a criminal syndicate. So he was teaching them how to talk English and Australian. So again, you get that phone call, you lower your risk assessment because you think you're talking with someone in your own country. Or
is there anything you can do?
be vigilant. If it's
But when you say be vigilant,
just
in
slow
the face
down.
of this, I mean,
Slow down. Just slow down. So many people, they get caught up. They get pushed down rabbit holes. And Cassandra said, look, speak to someone in your family. Look, this is what's happening. There's a well-known Australian who's in Japan at the moment who's gone through this. Her family is saying we were a little bit suspicious. So we've got to act on those suspicions, take that time, investigate, use the internet to our advantage. Who are they? Let's investigate. Where are you? There's a good little scammer who jumps onto YouTube and he asks them, where are you? Oh, we're in America. What time is it in San Francisco right now? If that's where you say you are. But they're not. They're in Karachi. And of course, now there's a pause because he's Googling what time it is in San
Gets
Francisco.
worse than that, Julie.
So those little pauses, we've got to act on them.
it gets worse than that. Julie from Mount Garnet's just texted me saying, Phil, my love is horses. And guess what? There are scammers in that space as well.
Yeah, everywhere. Everywhere where someone has a passion.
We got to go. Thank you to both of you. Professor Cassandra Cross, thank you. And Paul Litherland. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks you so much.
Thanks, Philip. Good to speak to you too, Cassandra.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.